He thought it was just another walk into the woods. But he will regret it. At first, only small ordinary things appeared near the abandoned camp. Then, one by one, more disturbing belongings surfaced, until investigators uncovered something that changed everything. The police found a few crucial clues. But will they be enough to reveal what truly happened? Under the endless stretch of the interstate, the couple drove together into the fading glow of the evening, the young man gripping the wheel with the quiet confidence of someone who had mapped out their road trip a dozen times in his head, while the young woman beside him adjusted the playlist, humming softly as the headlights cut a narrow path through the dusk. They were newly engaged, glowing with the excitement of starting a life together, and this trip was meant to be their little adventure before the pressures of planning a wedding consumed them. Friends had teased them for picking such a remote route, a drive that wound through long stretches of wilderness and sparse towns where cell reception often faded into static, but they had laughed it off, saying they wanted quiet, time alone, a story that would belong only to them. For several days, they shared pictures of sunsets, trails, and old diners with their friend back home, who was one of the few people who knew their itinerary in detail. Then, one night, she called them, not once but several times, her voice swallowed by voicemail. At first she thought nothing of it. Poor signal, maybe they were camping, but as hours turned into a full day with no reply, her unease grew. By the second day, her calls became frantic, her texts unanswered. Panic set in when social media went silent, when the steady stream of shared memories abruptly stopped. Finally, with dread tightening her chest, she contacted the police, reporting that her closest friends had disappeared somewhere along the long stretch of highway that cut through the mountains. Local authorities opened the case, though not with the urgency she had hoped for. They explained that adults often went off the grid during trips, that maybe the couple wanted space. Yet her insistence, combined with the strange sudden silence, compelled them to at least begin preliminary checks. Patrol cars searched parking areas and lookout points, volunteers scoured rest stops, and helicopters later traced the winding roads where their car should have passed, but days slipped into weeks with nothing but silence. The wilderness swallowed them whole. Rumors began to circulate in nearby towns. Some said they must have fought and gone separate ways, others whispered about accidents in the mountains, while a darker few suggested foul play. Still, no trace appeared. Then, a month later, on a damp morning, a deputy spotted something glinting under the rising mist on a forgotten stretch of back road. He slowed, his headlights catching the twisted wreckage of a vehicle half submerged in a ditch, the paint scratched, glass shattered, the license plate confirming the nightmare. It was their car. News spread quickly, shock washing over everyone who had followed the desperate search. The vehicle looked as if it had rolled, skidding off the asphalt into the brush, but there were no bodies inside, no blood, no indication of whether they had crawled free or been taken. For investigators, it was both a breakthrough and a deeper puzzle. Why had it taken so long to find? And where were the couple now? Search teams poured into the forest, scouring the area with dogs, drones, and boots on the ground. The friend who had first reported them missing stood near the wreck when she was told, tears streaking her face as she whispered that she knew they would not have just vanished like this. Then, against every expectation, the search widened deeper into the woods, and weeks after the car was found, two hikers stumbled upon a surreal scene. The missing couple, alive, though gaunt and weary, huddled beneath the skeletal trees miles from civilization. The rescuers rushed to them, expecting joy, relief, but what they heard was stranger. When asked what had happened, their voices trembled, their words halting, as if memory itself resisted being told. They explained only this: they had struck something on the road that night, something they could not recognize, the impact sending their car tumbling into the ditch. When they came to, dazed and battered, the forest closed in around them, and disoriented, they wandered until they could no longer find the road. They said they had survived on rainwater, on scraps of foraged food, and on each other's determination, though their story raised more questions than it answered. What had they hit? Why had they not returned to the road sooner? Authorities pressed them gently, but the details remained vague, almost evasive. Days later, as investigators examined the stretch of highway, they uncovered a crucial piece of evidence: a roadside camera mounted on a weathered utility pole, its feed still intact. The footage revealed the night of the crash. The couple's car speeding down the lane, sudden headlight swerving, then a dark shape bolting across the asphalt. Freeze-frame analysis revealed it for what it was. A wild boar, massive, tusks glinting as it darted into their path. The impact was clear. The car clipped the animal, swerved violently, and rolled into the ditch as the boar vanished into the trees, uninjured and gone. The revelation shocked the public who had followed the case, for the couple's vague story of something unknown suddenly had a face, and it was not a shadowy threat or human hand, but a creature of the wilderness itself. Yet the footage raised new unease. Why had the couple spoken so cryptically? Why did they act as if they had struck something unidentifiable? And how had they survived so long in the forest without making their way back to safety? These questions lingered, echoing louder than the answers provided, as though the truth was only half revealed. The case did not close with the discovery of the footage. Instead, it widened into a mystery that blurred the line between accident and enigma, and as news outlets spread the story, the world began to ask, what really happened on that lonely stretch of road, and why does their silence feel heavier than the truth caught on tape? The forest still carried the weight of unanswered questions long after the couple had been pulled back into civilization, their pale faces and weakened bodies offering only partial relief to those who had waited a month for news, because their survival was not the end but the beginning of a more unsettling mystery. Authorities escorted them to a rural clinic where doctors examined them, noting malnutrition, dehydration, scratches, and bruises that had healed unevenly, yet no major injuries consistent with a high-speed rollover crash. This discrepancy immediately caught the attention of investigators who quietly wondered how two people could emerge from a wreck with only surface wounds yet claim they had been stranded in the wilderness for weeks. Their families rushed to their side, tears mixing with questions that the couple seemed reluctant to answer directly. When reporters swarmed outside, demanding details, the young man and woman repeated the same line. They had hit something they could not identify, the car had rolled, and when they woke they were too disoriented to find their way back. They insisted the woods seemed endless, every direction leading them further from the road. But behind closed doors, detectives reviewed the roadside camera footage again and again, freezing the frame where the massive boar darted into the headlights, studying the angle of the car's roll, the trajectory into the ditch. Technically, it aligned with their explanation, yet something about their hesitation, their insistence on calling it something unknown, unsettled the investigators. Why not simply say animal? Why lean into vagueness unless there was more they were unwilling, or unable, to admit? The friend who had first sounded the alarm visited them in the hospital and later described the encounter as chilling. Instead of embracing her with gratitude, they appeared distant, distracted, as if half of their minds still lingered in the forest. She asked them directly why they hadn't answered her calls, why they hadn't tried to get back to the road, and their silence left her colder than any explanation could. Law enforcement pushed deeper into the surrounding woods where the couple had been discovered, searching for signs of their encampment or traces of where they had wandered. What they found were faint fire pits, improvised shelters of branches, and scattered footprints that seemed to spiral in circles, suggesting they had walked endlessly without direction. Even odder were moments where tracks appeared to split, as if they had separated and regrouped multiple times. Behavior inconsistent with two people struggling simply to survive. Forensic teams studied their clothing, hoping to find trace evidence of the animal or the crash, but instead discovered only soil, moss, and fragments of bark, signs of long exposure but nothing conclusive. As the public demanded clarity, the couple gave a brief interview, their words carefully chosen, their hands clasped tightly together, saying only that the forest was darker and more disorienting than anyone could imagine, that they had relied on each other to keep going. Yet their eyes betrayed something else. A kind of fear that lingered even in safety, and viewers noticed. Online forums erupted with theories ranging from psychological trauma to more sinister explanations. Some claimed the couple had staged their disappearance, others suggested they had encountered someone, or something, in the woods that they refused to mention. Investigators returned to the footage again, this time analyzing the seconds before impact, noting how the headlights captured not only the boar but a second, fleeting shadow at the edge of the frame, tall and indistinct, gone in an instant. Was it a tree, a trick of the light, or something else on the roadside that night? When questioned about it, the couple denied seeing anything beyond the animal, their voices clipped, their gazes dropping to the floor. The police chief, in a press conference, emphasized that the crash had a clear cause, that no foul play was suspected, yet his tone lacked conviction. Meanwhile, the friend who had raised the alarm began to doubt whether she had ever truly known them, recalling moments before the trip when they had spoken cryptically about wanting to get away from everything. She shared her concerns with investigators, who noted the comments in their files but struggled to connect them to any tangible evidence. As days turned into weeks after their rescue, the couple retreated from public view, declining interviews, leaving even their families with more silence than answers. And yet, questions multiplied. Why had the car remained hidden for so long on a stretch of road supposedly combed during the initial search? Why did the couple's story emphasize confusion rather than concrete details? And most of all, why did both of them, when separately questioned, use the exact same phrasing, "something unknown," as though rehearsed, as though afraid of saying more? The official narrative hardened around the footage of the boar, satisfying the broader public, but among those who had walked the forest and those who had studied the case closely, unease lingered. Because if it was truly just an animal, why did their eyes still hold that haunted look? And what was that faint shadow that appeared in the footage, flickering for less than a second before vanishing into the night? When the news about the boar surfaced, many people believed the story had reached its logical end, that the mystery of the missing couple had been solved and there was nothing more to discuss. Yet the deeper investigators dug into the details of their month-long disappearance, the more troubling questions arose. Because although the footage from the pole-mounted camera clearly showed a large wild boar darting across the road in the middle of the night and the vehicle swerving violently before tumbling into the ditch, it still did not explain how the engaged couple had managed to vanish for nearly 4 weeks before reappearing miles deep into the forest with no provisions, no clear sense of direction, and no memory of what had happened in the days immediately after the crash. So the police began pressing them harder, asking over and over how they had survived, where they had slept, what they had eaten, and why they hadn't tried to flag down help from the road that was less than 2 miles away. And each time the couple gave the same halting replies, saying they had been in shock, that they didn't remember the first days clearly, that they had simply walked and walked until they found a place that felt safe. But that answer didn't sit well with the detectives who reviewed the case because their clothes, though torn, showed no signs of a month's worth of wear, their shoes weren't as destroyed as one would expect from trekking through rugged terrain, and their bodies, though thinner and fatigued, were not nearly as dehydrated or malnourished as they should have been after such a long time lost in the woods, leading some officers to whisper privately that maybe the couple hadn't spent all that time in the forest at all, maybe they had been somewhere else, perhaps even with someone else. And when the press got wind of this speculation, the headlines exploded with theories ranging from abduction to cult activity to the possibility that the couple themselves were hiding something, which only increased the public's fascination with the case, drawing reporters to the small town where the wrecked car had been pulled from the ditch. And suddenly what had seemed like a tragic but straightforward accident was now the center of a storm of rumors, accusations, and unanswered questions, with the families of both the bride-to-be and the groom-to-be begging for privacy while at the same time pleading for the public to believe their children had simply been the victims of a bizarre accident and nothing more. Though privately even the families began to wonder how it was possible for 2 people to vanish from the scene of a crash and remain unseen, unheard, and untraceable for an entire month, because cell towers had shown no pings from their phones after the night of the collision, and dogs brought to the forest to search for them during the first week had found no scent trails leading away from the wreckage. Yet weeks later the same couple emerged alive, frightened but otherwise relatively intact, as though they had stepped out of thin air, and in late-night conversations among the townsfolk the story became something else, no longer just about a car accident but about a mystery that didn't add up, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. And as the investigators sifted through every possible angle, from hidden cabins in the woods to off-the-grid communities rumored to exist in the region, the couple themselves withdrew further, refusing most interviews, declining to elaborate on what they had done, and appearing at times as though they were protecting someone or something, which only fed the idea that there was more to the story than a boar crossing a road, because accidents happen every day, but people do not vanish for 30 days and return without scars of the ordeal. And in this gap between what was known and what remained hidden, the real terror began to take root, not in the crash itself, not in the wild animal that had escaped into the trees, but in the silence of 2 young people who seemed burdened by a secret they could not, or would not, share with the world. The weeks following the couple's reappearance did not bring closure as many had expected, but instead unraveled into a deeper maze of suspicions, contradictions, and haunting discoveries that only amplified the unease surrounding their case. Because while the footage of the wild boar offered a tangible explanation for the crash, it shed no light on the 30 days that followed, and it was in that silence that the investigation began to dig deeper, tracing every possible thread, beginning with the forest itself, a sprawling and largely uncharted expanse that had been searched multiple times during the couple's disappearance but never yielded a trace of them, which now seemed impossible unless they had managed to hide deliberately, and when officers returned with new teams to canvass the woods again, hoping to find some sign of where the pair had lived or sheltered, they stumbled upon things that only thickened the air of mystery, such as a fire pit that appeared too neatly constructed to be the work of two panicked accident victims, and discarded food wrappers bearing expiration dates only a few weeks old, suggesting someone else had been in those woods and had been feeding them or at least crossing paths with them. And when forensic tests confirmed fingerprints that did not belong to either the bride or the groom, the whispers of outside involvement grew louder, though no match appeared in any criminal database, leaving police with the unsettling notion that the couple might have spent their month not merely wandering but in the company of someone whose identity remained unknown, someone who had left no trace in official records, and the couple, when confronted with these findings, only grew more defensive, their words becoming clipped, their eyes avoiding contact, and their insistence on not remembering began to feel less like trauma and more like deliberate withholding, which pushed detectives to review every element of their timeline from the night of the crash onward, and what emerged was troubling. The path they were found on was more than 12 miles from the wreckage, and along the way searchers found no torn clothing, no blood, no survival gear, nothing that indicated two people had moved through. So how had they arrived there without leaving a trail, and more pressingly, why had the dogs not picked up their scent during the first frantic weeks, when hundreds of volunteers combed the same area? And this growing inconsistency began to feed into darker theories, some investigators suggesting the couple had been kept somewhere out of sight, perhaps in a cabin or bunker, and then released or allowed to go when it was convenient, which ignited the press again, fueling headlines that speculated about secret communities, illegal groups hiding in the forest, or even shadowy abductions, though there was never any demand for ransom or signs of physical abuse on the victims. Yet when their medical records were quietly leaked to a reporter, it was revealed both had unusually low levels of certain vitamins, signs consistent with a restricted diet, and odd abrasions on their wrists, faint but suspicious, which many interpreted as possible restraints, though no official statement confirmed it. And as pressure mounted for answers, the couple withdrew further, canceling wedding plans, refusing all but the most basic questioning, and retreating into a silence that drove a wedge between them and their families, who now privately feared something terrible had happened in those lost days that the two were too afraid to share. But the real turning point came when a local hiker stumbled upon a partially collapsed shed deep in the woods, nearly hidden under moss and branches, and inside were crude sleeping mats, empty cans of food, and a notebook with pages torn out, leaving behind only fragments of strange symbols and short phrases written in a trembling hand, one of which read, "We wait until night," and though the investigators never released the full contents to the public, leaks suggested the writing did not match the couple's handwriting, and even more chilling was the discovery that the shed was only 5 miles from where the pair had finally been found, meaning they could not have been lost at random but were very likely kept there, and yet the couple continued to insist that they remembered nothing beyond the crash. Nothing beyond walking endlessly through the forest until they collapsed, and it was this denial that made the case shift in tone from tragedy to something darker, a crime hidden behind silence, with a wild-boar explanation now reduced to a footnote, because while it might have caused the accident, it clearly did not explain the month that followed, and so the authorities faced the daunting possibility that the truth would never come from the two who lived it but only from what could be unearthed in the shadows of the forest. And as autumn crept closer, with days shortening and leaves falling, the search for whoever had been out there with them grew colder, the evidence more fragile, and the community more restless, wondering if someone dangerous was still moving through the woods, unseen, waiting, while the couple themselves carried on with a hollow stare that seemed to suggest they had been broken in a way they could never fully speak of. The discovery of the collapsed shed and the fragments of the notebook should have been the final clue needed to bring resolution, yet instead it pushed the investigation into a darker and more confusing maze, because every lead that surfaced only opened new questions, and the couple's silence grew heavier, more deliberate, until it felt as though they were carrying a secret so vast that even the act of speaking might destroy them. And while officials tried to reassure the public that there was no evidence of ongoing danger, few in the town believed it, because how could two young people vanish into the woods for an entire month, emerge alive, and yet leave behind evidence of someone else's presence? Fingerprints, food, writing in a notebook, without that someone still being out there, watching, waiting, hidden among the trees, and so search teams were sent back into the forest, combing every ravine, every abandoned hunting shack, every forgotten trail, yet the figure behind the fingerprints remained a ghost, leaving nothing traceable, as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. And it was during one of these late searches that officers uncovered a chilling detail, A trail of bones from animals. Small ones at first, rabbits and birds, then larger, a deer's skull left half buried under leaves, each arranged in unsettling patterns as though they had been deliberately placed, and the closer investigators looked, the more they realized these were not the random remains of wildlife but markers, symbols leading deeper into the woods, and the theory emerged that whoever had kept the couple alive had used these macabre signs to chart territory or leave warnings. Yet when the couple were shown photographs of the bones, they both recoiled with fear so sharp that the bride-to-be broke down in sobs, begging for the pictures to be taken away, and though she insisted she did not remember, her reaction convinced detectives she had seen those arrangements before, perhaps even lived among them during her lost days, which only strengthened the theory that the pair had been captives, though of whom and for what reason no one could say, and the press seized on this narrative, spinning stories about a hermit, a cult leader, or a fugitive living deep off the grid, someone who had taken the couple in after their crash, kept them hidden, then abandoned them when the search pressure grew too intense, but the authorities, unwilling to fuel hysteria, denied these claims. Publicly, even as privately, they admitted the evidence pointed that way, and in the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the small town grew thick with paranoia, people reporting strange noises at night, footsteps near their cabins, distant fires burning where no campsite should be, and always the image of the boar lingered, the accident that had set everything into motion, reminding everyone that chance and terror sometimes walk hand in hand. And yet as time passed, the case became less about the animal and more about the missing month, and it was here that the strangest twist of all appeared, for while combing through the couple's personal belongings recovered from the wreck, technicians found a memory card lodged beneath the passenger seat, cracked and nearly destroyed, but salvageable enough for forensic experts to pull fragmented files, and what they recovered were shaky video clips taken on the night of the crash, showing headlights slicing through the trees, laughter between the two as they drove, and then the sudden scream of the bride as something darted across the road, the violent swerve, the sickening roll into darkness, and then silence before the camera cut out. But one final clip, time-stamped days later, showed a hand not belonging to either the bride or the groom holding the phone, panning across a dim interior space lit by firelight, a space that looked disturbingly like the shed later discovered, with the mats, the cans, the crude writing on the wall. And though the face of the person behind the camera never appeared, a voice murmured something low, unintelligible, and when audio experts enhanced the sound, they claimed it was a phrase repeated in a language no one could immediately identify, which only deepened the unease, because it proved beyond doubt that the couple had not been alone in those weeks. Someone else had been there, documenting them, controlling the phone, perhaps feeding them, and certainly leaving the trail of bones that investigators later found. And when this evidence was quietly shown to the couple in the hopes it might jog their memories, they reacted with terror so visceral it unsettled even the most hardened officers, the bride clutching her fiancé's arm, the groom's face pale as he whispered that they could never go back there, never speak of it again, which convinced the detectives more than ever that they remembered everything, but were bound by some unspoken fear, a fear perhaps planted by their captor, a fear that saying too much might bring him back, or worse, that he was still watching them, waiting for the moment they broke their silence, and so the investigation reached a kind of standoff, with authorities certain of foul play yet lacking the identity of the perpetrator, and the couple alive but trapped in a silence that felt like another kind of prison, and in the middle of this the community itself fractured, half demanding answers and arrests, the other half too afraid to venture into the woods anymore, whispering that some things were better left undiscovered. And though official reports continued to insist the crash had been caused by the boar and that no ongoing threat was confirmed, the leaked clips told another story, one that hinted at a figure who knew the woods better than any searcher, who could hide two people for 30 days without leaving a trace, and who could vanish again into the trees with nothing but firelight and bones to mark his presence. And as the leaves turned brown and the first frost crept over the ground, the fear settled like a permanent shadow, because everyone understood now that while the boar might have caused the accident, it had also delivered the couple into the hands of someone waiting in the darkness, and though they had returned, the forest had kept its secrets, and perhaps always would, leaving behind only the dreadful certainty that the story was not over, that the missing month still hung between truth and silence, and that the most terrifying part of it all was not what had been found, but what remained hidden just beyond the edge of the trees. In the months that followed, the story of the engaged couple drifted between fact and rumor, a puzzle everyone wanted solved but no one could piece together, and though official reports declare the accident caused by the wild boar as the root of their ordeal, no one could shake the feeling that the crash was merely the beginning, a doorway into something far stranger that had unfolded in the silent woods. For the footage on the salvaged memory card, the shed with its torn pages, the fingerprints that matched no one in any database, and the strange voice muttering in a language the experts struggled to identify all pointed to the presence of a figure that existed in the margins of society, someone who lived where the trees were thickest, where no road reached, and who had the ability to vanish without leaving more than shadows. Yet while the police quietly admitted they could not explain what had happened during the lost month, they closed the case to calm the public, insisting there was no evidence of crime, no continuing danger, no reason for panic, though behind closed doors officers confessed they feared whoever had hidden the couple was still out there, watching, perhaps even listening to the very questions investigators dared to ask, and the couple themselves became living mysteries, retreating from public life, canceling all plans, moving from one relative's house to another until finally they were seen no more, as if they had chosen exile from the world rather than endure the constant whispers, and soon the small town where it all began carried the weight of a legend. Stories told in hushed tones at diners and bars, parents warning children never to wander too deep into the forest, and hunters claiming they saw smoke rising in places no campsite should exist, the faint glow of firelight between the pines, or heard distant chanting carried on the wind at night, though no proof was ever captured, and each new account only made the story grow until it lived a life of its own, larger than the accident, larger than the couple, a ghost tale rooted in truth, that someone was out there in the wild, a person or a group, waiting, feeding, building strange markers with bones, keeping watch over travelers who strayed too close, and if the couple had indeed been kept alive by such a figure, then perhaps they had survived only because they obeyed, only because they chose silence when released, which explained their terror whenever asked to recall what had happened, their refusal to elaborate, their eyes darkening at any mention of the shed or the symbols, and so the silence became its own testimony, more powerful than words, more haunting than any confession, for it suggested that what they had endured was not only real but still lingering, a threat that could return, and as time passed the official story of the boar and the crash faded into background noise, a technicality that explained how it began but never why it unfolded, as it did, and the legend of the forest took its place, leaving behind an unfinished tale, for while the couple withdrew into anonymity, the woods remained vast and unbroken, filled with secrets no search team could uncover, and those who remembered the case most vividly often said the same thing, that the true horror was not the crash, not the accident, not even the month that disappeared from the couple's lives, but the realization that the forest had eyes, and that someone was still out there, waiting for the next headlights to appear on the lonely road, waiting for another chance encounter that would vanish into silence and leave behind only questions, the kind that never find answers, the kind that linger in the dark long after the story is told, and though the world eventually moved on, the locals never forgot, and even years later whenever another car swerved to avoid an animal on that same stretch of road, people wondered if it was really chance, or if something was moving in the shadows again, repeating the cycle, preparing the next silence, the next missing month that would end with more questions than truths, because sometimes accidents are only accidents, but other times they are doors, and once opened, they never truly close.